The final reckoning has arrived. The finale of Mission Impossible has officially released in theaters, directed by Christopher McQuarrie, starring, as always, Tom Cruise, Ving Rhames, Simon Pegg, and this time alongside Hayley Atwell. This movie is about how our lives are the sum of our choices, and Ethan Hunt and his IMF team race against time to stop the entity from total annihilation. So we're going to talk about this final Mission Impossible movie, more than likely, and if you as a Christian should watch it right now. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm your host Tim, and we exist to help Christians live in the world, not of the world, by utilizing our convictions in the movies and shows we watch. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is rated PG-13 for some sequences of strong violence and action, some bloody themes, and some brief language. So we're going to go over any convictions you may have that may prevent you from watching this movie, any theological themes that may be present, and wrap it up with my own personal thoughts on the film. Without further ado, let's dive into the Christian Conviction Meter. If this is your first time here, the Christian Conviction Meter is a series of 5 convictions. These are areas that may distract or hinder your relationship with Jesus, which we don't want to do. That's why this exists, to help you find good movies to watch based on those convictions. Without further ado, on to our first category. And once again, this for the most part has a lot of the same kind of violence and gore that we've expected with the Mission Impossible franchise. Although I would argue probably since the first and third ones, it does have a bit more kind of graphic violence to it. Let me explain. As always, there is going to be some hand-to-hand combat contained within this film, and they are very intense moments, whether it's trying to point guns away or point knives away. This is a very intense kind of fight choreography that happens throughout the entire film. It's a race against time, so these moments are going to be at a bit of a more intense pace, and that is shown throughout this entire movie. Of course, there always is some shootings that take place throughout this franchise, and this one is no different, with a different mixed use of arms, whether it's a handgun or some stronger calibers. There's definitely a lot of shooting that takes place within the film. There is also a few pretty brutal deaths that happen within the film. Most of the time it's by just kind of random side characters that we don't really see or really care about in this film. Of course, on top of that, there is some knife stabbings and different things of that sort. There's a man who is cut, and you cannot necessarily see the cut, but you do hear the sounds of him being cut. On top of that, a man's face kind of hits a sharp point, and his blood kind of splatters onto the object. It is pretty kind of graphic. Most of the action here, I would say, is about the same caliber, especially what we've seen since Rogue Nation with Christopher McQuarrie taking over. So there's nothing, I'd say, extremely out of the ordinary. There's a few kind of scarier or intense violent moments within the film, but again, like I mentioned, it's nothing that is out of the realm of what we've seen with the Mission Impossible franchise, a lot of which I just mentioned. So we're going to give this area specifically a 3 out of 5. Moving on to Lust. Now, as per usual with a PG-13 film, there is no nudity, or what you would expect of a PG-13 film, but there is no nudity contained within the film. That being said, though, in terms of this particular category, there is a brief kissing moments here throughout the film that do take place in this movie, as well as, of course, there is a bit of time where Tom Cruise wears very form-fitting swim trunks. It almost kind of looks like underwear, but I don't think it is, but it is very form-fitting. That being said, there's nothing like explicitly shown or focused on with these moments as if to try to draw a more lustful intent, because that's not what this series is about. But again, these things do exist here, so to be on the safe side, we're going to give this a 1 out of 5 just to be cautious. Our next category is substances, and for the most part, there is not a lot here, which is pretty nice, I will say that. There's no drugs contained within the film whatsoever, but there is a bit of alcohol. We don't know exactly what it is because it's contained within a flask, and there is a character seen briefly drinking it, but other than that, there really is nothing for this category. So once again, to be kind of safer than sorry, we're also going to give this a 1 out of 5. Our next category is profanity, and I am surprised by the lack of it because a lot of PG-13 films do use a decent amount here, but there really isn't all that much contained within this movie. Now, that being said, there still is some strong language here, but it isn't to the same level that you would say even of like a Marvel movie or even previous Mission Impossible movies. So that is something that is pretty cool about this film if you're not a big fan of language. But for the words that are used, hell is used in this film, along with the DA word, the AS word. The BI word is probably the strongest word here being used. But again, they're kind of intermittent throughout. You probably might even miss some of these words. I almost did. So because of these words, we're going to give this a 3 out of 5 for this category. And our last category is intense/horror scenes. This is not a horror movie, which means there is no horror contained within this film, but it is an intense movie, and I'd argue it is one of the more intense movies of the Mission Impossible franchise, but this one does have a bit of a darker tone. That being said, there is some re-showing of some previous movies footage, particularly when the men who were on the submarine that exploded and rose up to the ice cap, that is shown. There also is some pretty gross corpses contained within the movie as well. And the plot itself is very much a intense plot because of the fact that it's about nuclear annihilation, right? And so it's all about trying to save the world essentially from extinction. And there's lines like every living person on this earth rests on his shoulders, or just different verbiage kind of similar to that. So it does have a more intense nature than some other previous Mission Impossible movies. And this film can also be emotional at times. Part of that is because of the fact that there is plenty of explosions that occur in this film, namely due to some bombs. There also is the disarming of bombs and just that whole intensity that comes with that. Of course, the 2 star sequences, quote unquote, of the film in terms of just the action, the submarine scene that takes place within the film, along with the plane sequence, which they have been highlighting in sizzle reels and promotionals and all the other stuff that come with this film, even the poster. And so those are pretty intense sequences. They definitely can leave you on the edge of your seat a little bit in watching them. But again, these are some of the things to note. Does it take a bit of a darker kind of spot in the Mission Impossible franchise? Yes, but I think it still has the same kind of intensity we have seen throughout this franchise. For the most part, it's going to be, once again, a 3 out of 5 in this category. And that brings our grand total to a 11 out of 25, just a little under halfway once again. And it seems to be the reoccurring kind of trend throughout this franchise of where it lands on our conviction scale. But as I always say, if there are any areas that we went over that you struggle with or personally make you feel uncomfortable or compromise your convictions, don't worry about watching the movie. We want to make sure that you find good movies to watch based on those convictions that the Lord has given you. So those are things to keep in mind. That being said, let's dive into some theological themes that are present within The Final Reckoning. And I will say this, I definitely noticed a bit more in this one than I did the last one. That being said, one of the characters, Gabriel, which honestly has a bit more religious ties than I initially expected. Not saying that it's present as much within this film, but kind of across the films for the most part, he does reference a lot of, by saying the words, "it is written," which of course, if you've read the Gospels, you know Jesus does say that, particularly when drawing back to some of the scriptures, particularly the time where Jesus went out to the wilderness and was tempted by Satan. Anytime Satan said or did something, try to tempt Jesus away from what he was doing, Jesus would respond with, "it is written." And so that is something pretty cool as a bit of a kind of theological tie that I noticed. There also is, of course, a reference to Noah and the ark. It's a very brief kind of moment, but it does lead into some other conversations about the entity believing it is God, being the anti-God, some of those things as well. Again, it's not explicitly a Christian theme other than, of course, the story of Noah and the ark. It's contained within the pages of scriptures, but in terms of the entity believing it is God or the anti-God, some of those things aren't, I would say, explicit Christian themes, but there are some more than I was really expecting, and it caught me off guard in a good way. I was pleasantly surprised. So with that wrapped up, what are my thoughts on Mission Impossible Final Reckoning? And what a crazy, intense ride to end this franchise off with. I would argue that it does take a step back from just the crazy kind of action heaviness of the franchise, and it kind of focuses more back to a little bit of its roots, if I'm being honest, with some more kind of intense, thrilling sequences rather than action-heavy moments, which is a nice change of pace and kind of pays homage to, obviously, the original movie in that way. But even within that, it does give us a darker and emotional story. This is a wrap-up film. It does truly feel like a finale, like there is some finality to not just this movie, but to the entire franchise, so much so that they even use, for the first time in the series, kind of some nostalgic pulls from some surprise reveals and sequences or just different things that they did in this film to really bring Mission Impossible, MI2, MI3, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout, and Dead Reckoning and the Final Reckoning kind of all together into this little wrapped up gift, essentially, for us, the audience, to enjoy. I was unexpected. I wasn't expecting some nostalgic pulls. I was expecting an emotional story, and that definitely did fairly well here. I will say one thing that was better in this one than the previous one is our villains. They felt much stronger. They felt more fleshed out, and I definitely liked them a bit more in this one compared to the last one. On top of that, the action here is, once again, just really solid. Even though it does more thrilling elements, namely with, of course, the plane sequence or the submarine sequence, some of those things, the action here is still very solid, along with its score. Its score is really, really good. They had like a choir for some parts of it, which was so unexpected, but the score here is really good, and the story here is overall solid. It's an enjoyable story. It's pretty easy to follow, although I will say this, the downside with this story is it does drag on. It is 2 hours and 49 minutes long. It's a long movie, and it can really feel like a long movie. There are some sequences I think could have been shorter. They added a few shots here and there, which are nice. I mean, they were good shots, but they're not necessary to the story. And especially when you have the first half of the film feeling very quick, and you drag out the middle, and then the end kind of felt, honestly, very well paced. It felt kind of awkward, but even with that, I still think it's an enjoyable movie and something that really brings Ethan Hunt and this part of the franchise to a close. Could this spawn off more Mission Impossible movies? Yes, absolutely. I honestly would not be surprised if they make more Mission Impossible movies, but I think this wraps up kind of Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt out in the mission field specifically in this way, and I think it wraps it up in just a nice bow. It was an enjoyable movie, and I just enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun, and I'm glad this was the movie that ended it, because I think going any further with Ethan and some of these other characters, I don't think you need to. I really don't. Will they pull back to the Mission Impossible franchise? I'm sure Paramount is already thinking it. I think this brings a closure to these characters, and it's done nicely. It's not perfect, and it's not the best Mission Impossible film. I still think that is Fallout, which, by the way, again, if you want me to rank all the movies from worst to best, let me know if that's something you may or may not be interested in. Overall, I enjoyed it. I'm going to stop delaying my score here. I'm going to give this an 8.9 out of 10. That might be higher for some people, and I'm sure this could potentially change even on a second rewatch, but I honestly enjoyed it. I don't have too many complaints other than it dragging a little bit. It was enjoyable. So it's an 11 out of 25 on the conviction meter. It's an 8.9 out of 10 on our review scale. Those are my thoughts, so let me know yours down in the comments below. Let's chat all things Mission Impossible Final Reckoning in the comments. And while you're down there, consider hitting that like and subscribing, joining our community here on YouTube. It just helps to send us out into the algorithm, allows us to reach more Christians so they can utilize their convictions in the movies and shows they watch. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend time with us here. We truly appreciate it. It means the absolute world to us. And if you stuck around for all 8 reviews of the Mission Impossible franchise, a special shout out to you all. Thank you for watching all of these reviews. I hope they have been helpful. I hope you've been able to take some things away and figure out, based on your convictions, if these are good movies for you to watch. That being said, there's a few reviews over here that you are able to check out, one of which is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, the previous Mission Impossible movie. And that's all I got. I'll see you all in the next one.